both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced like old friends often do.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Gung Ho. It's October 16, 2020. I have a good friend and guest with me. He should be a co-host, Jim Henry. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Again, you should know by now that I went from college into the Marine Corps. I'm a captain and retired. I was in Vietnam. I practiced criminal law. I've been up against corruption and misconduct from the very beginning, starting with the legal aid and the criminal division. So I've been around, and I've experienced a lot of things firsthand. I didn't get involved politically until maybe 10 years ago, but Jim has some really good credentials. I want you to tell the people about you.
This camera?
Over there, look over there.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm not going to go into the whole gory history, but I'm basically an economist and a lawyer, and I do a lot of investigative reporting. And I'm also teaching at a course at Yale, and just joined the board of Amnesty International US, which is an organization that works a lot on human rights questions. So over the years, I've lived in Sag Harbor since 1987. But before that, I was lucky enough to grow up in Minnesota, went to, worked my ass off in high school, got a scholarship to Harvard, and then to Harvard Law School. And I decided not really to pursue the corporate law thing. I mean, that's something that, a lot of people do. But, in my case, I found it more rewarding to be in the corporate world. I worked a long time as chief economist at McKinsey & Company, and then I worked for Jack Welch at General Electric. So I had a lot of time in the corporate sector, but more recently, since about the year 2000, I've been active in all kinds of causes.
And you're an author.
I'm an author. I've written 4 books, and one of them is about, it's called The Blood Bankers. It's about where the money went that was loaned to developing countries, a lot of corruption. But I'm still doing a lot of investigative journalism. I did
the book about Vietnam vets.
Vietnam Vets was a Nader project. Ralph Nader is a great friend of mine, and he put together this team to look at the Veterans Administration back in the early 70s, and we wrote a whole book about how the VA was mistreating veterans who came back and not paying attention to problems that they were having.
What was the title of that?
It's called The Discarded Army. Paul Starr, who's now a professor at Princeton, and Ray Bonner, who was a Marine, ex-Marine, and then he became a journalist for the New York Times. I think he's now living in Bali. We wrote this book about vets, and I interviewed something like 125 veterans who were just come back, most of whom had seen combat, which about 10% of veterans in Vietnam saw combat. So.
And when you wrote that book, there was nothing about Agent Orange. Nobody knew what was going on.
Nobody knew about Agent Orange. They didn't have the term PSTD had not been invented. There are a lot of people suffering from things. Things were just going to get better.
I mean, worse.
Well, I think the lessons we had to learn from Vietnam, we never learned. At many levels. I mean, that's a long conversation. But basically, I was lucky enough to have a draft number that was 365 in 1970, and.
I was lucky enough to volunteer.
Yeah. So we came together, I think, over some constitutional rights issues when you guys decided to march, and I represented the veterans against the Iraq War, East End vets, in the march to get that radical right to march in a 4th of July parade in Southampton. Southampton Village didn't like it. They wanted to throw you guys out, and so I went into federal court on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, showed up in Central Islip, and the judge said, "You're here on the holiday weekend. What are you doing?" And the judge said, I'm about to leave. And I said, "The Constitution does not take vacations." So we got you the right to march in that parade, and I think they had to change their whole procedure because they were trying to exclude people they didn't disagree with, which, governments can't do.
They didn't want
even Southampton Village.
They didn't want any dissent. We were just an organization that supported vets and people in the service, but we were against the war, and there was nothing controversial about that.
Right. Yeah.
All right, we're going to get local, I guess. All politics are local. I want to talk about our Congressman Lee Zeldin for a while. I know a little bit about him because when he ran the last time, I did some online research. And what I found out is I didn't like. And these are my opinions. First of all, you can't find anything about his military service other than he was in Iraq at some time. I know for sure he was an officer, a lawyer. I've seen photographs of him in Iraq, and they show him in large rooms, armored up, but he's in a large room, like maybe a mess hall. He's clean, he's dry, he's happy. And then they show photographs of him, or not him, they show a photograph of a fire squad out in the field. He was never out in the field. He was not infantry. He was always in the rear. We called him rear echelon mother effers. That's what it was. I tried to find out if he saw any action. You can't find out anything. Everybody that saw combat got what they called a combat action badge. And that, they give that to people that were in combat. You can't find that for him at all. But he makes a big thing about being a warrior. He's no warrior. He just...
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing that concerns me. I have a lot of respect for people who join the military and serve the country, and I think that they, deserve better treatment than this president is giving them. And certainly in the area of the Veterans Administration, we were fighting to get much better care for people who are leaving the service. I think Zeldin's making an issue of this because it's one of the few things that he can try to run on. He hasn't got a long record of accomplishment as an activist, as a crusader for causes. He doesn't have a legislative track record to stand on. I'm a registered Republican. That may be surprising to people, but I get all of his literature, and he's talking about being environmentalist. He didn't complain when Trump's EPA was dismantled. He's voted with this president 83% of the time, 93% of the time on all of his environmental policies. He has no record of defending the wetlands laws that Trump was eviscerating. He has no position on climate change that we've heard about. We can only imagine what his position is. All he's talking about is supporting the military and the police. His big claim to fame is that he's backing the police. Well, news to him, there's a lot of people who support the police and are just critical of the police when they become brutal, like we would be critical of any organization that has abuse within it. But I can't see, on issue after issue, Zeldin has voted down the line with Trump. He's been silent about the COVID crisis. He said nothing to criticize the president on the COVID fiasco that we have. Thousands of people in New York have died from this illness. It's not a joke. And he's going around posing with people as if he's some warrior. Where was the volunteering and the heroism when we needed him to stand up? He's taking money from Steve Bannon, an indicted felon, is one of the arch conservatives, one of Trump's programmers. He's had a lot of meetings with Robert Mercer, who's one of the big hedge fund guys in New York. I think, these are, he is not a man of the people, and he's putting himself off. So my problem with his military record is not that he volunteered to go to Iraq. It's that he's making such a political deal out of it, as if it was really, some reason for us to vote for him.
Well, I don't. His military record is no record that I could find other than he was in the military, like millions of people have been. Also, I think I'm sure about this, that every time the Affordable Care Act came up, he voted against it. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, with the 93% Trump track record, it's hard to find what he would have voted against the president on. I can't identify really any significant legislation. Look, the guy supported a concealed carry law that would have allowed New York State, required New York State to allow other states like Florida that allow concealed carry to give pistol permits that could be used in New York. That's not something New Yorkers ought to be in favor of. You know, we already have enough gun violence in this state. He supported, you know, on health care. I don't know what he's done on health care other than oppose the only system out there that we have, which is the Affordable Care Act. He's a down-the-line supporter of all of Trump's nominees for the judiciary, who are extremely right-wing. On tax policy, he supported this god-awful repeal of the corporate tax, gutting of the corporate tax code in 2017 that transferred something like $500 billion to the largest companies on the planet. You know, he has no program for tax reform. We're going to need tax reform in this state because New York is hit hard by the COVID crisis, and the New York State is facing a $60 billion deficit. Did Congressman Zeldin stand up in front of Congress and demand a stimulus package when it counted that would help New York get a bailout? You know, we're going to be laying off emergency workers and teachers. They already lost 1,200 teacher jobs in New York State. You know, the state's in a financial crisis, and this guy is running around talking about cops and his non-existent war record.
I remember the last time he ran, he had a fundraiser in Manhattan, and I said to myself, why would he have a fundraiser in Manhattan? So I did a little research. It turns out that the headline speaker was Steve Bannon, and that's why.
Well, Steve Bannon, people may not remember that Bannon was at the White House. He was one of the key architects of Trump's whole strategy and his messaging, this whole authoritarian populism thing. Ordinary working people have had a hard time in this country for a decade. The Democratic Party didn't do what it should have done for them. And they've been able to take advantage of that. But
getting the support of Steve Bannon is not a good thing.
I mean, Bannon is funded by billionaires. He was caught on the $50 million yacht in Long Island Sound. You know, that's where they arrested him. He was taking bogus donations for a Build the Wall NGO and got paid $1 million to set up money laundering schemes. So Bannon is headed for the slammer, and Zeldin is the guy that he was raising money for. So I mean, I think.
How many people do you think from the first district went to Manhattan to hear Steve Bannon talk?
Oh, I'm sure there are a few rich guys. You know,
that's it.
That's about it. And there's any number of very wealthy people that love Donald Trump. And there's also a fair. I hate to say this because I'm a big fan of the country of Israel all my life, but I think Zeldin on that issue is basically exploiting the fact that most Americans don't know much about Israeli politics, or the fact that it's basically the country has been moving to the right under the current government, Bibi Netanyahu, and there's this whole faction that's in favor of basically driving the Palestinians out of the country. Most American Jews, I think, support a two-state solution to this day. But the annexations that have been going on, this plan that Trump supported, which was to annex the West Bank, that's something I think Zeldin has never faced any questions about. But I'd love to know how he feels about annexing the West Bank and driving the Palestinians into the sea.
I was so ignorant not too long ago that I didn't realize that the Palestinians were under an occupation by the Israelis. I didn't realize it was an occupation territory, which is actually, it's a war crime, what they've done. Occupy someone else's land and not leave, that's a war crime. It's gone on for 50 years. So I did a little research. Lee Zeldin is, I think, by far the most zealous supporter of the Israeli government policies. And I'm saying this because I read it in Newsday that he wanted us, the U.S., to give the Israelis bunker busters. These are 30,000-pound bombs and planes to attack Iran nuclear facilities. In writing, he said, do this. And I said, what? That starts another war. And what do we do when Israel attacks Iran? You get sucked into it.
Well, the United States has had, you know, a pretty sad track record of intervening in Iran from 1953 on, and you know, the regime there is, you know, it's hard to apologize for it. It's a pretty brutal theocracy. However, Obama, I think, Biden had the right instincts, which is, you know, these people are going to make a nuclear weapon if you just drive them into, you know, into the corner. We've got to have some deal that settles and makes the whole region safer, and that's what he did. But then Trump abrogated that deal almost as soon as he came into office, and now we're in a situation where there's many people are worried that if Iran is not brought back to the table, we're going to have much more worse security situation.
I'm of the opinion that the two-state solution is off the table, never will be back on the table. That some Israelis are okay the way it is right now. That's how I feel about it. There's other things I could say. I'm not going to go any further.
No, but it requires a lot of leadership on the part of the Americans. The only time we've made progress in that region is when the U.S. president would actually come in and put the parties together and say, you know, you guys have got to make a deal. And I think there's plenty of crimes on both sides. You know, that's the way I see it.
The problem with crime on both sides, one side has the absolute overwhelming military power, intelligence, surveillance, and the other side fights with rocks. I don't know what else they have. That's about it. They have rocks, and they have. Well, Hamas has some weapons, but it's.
Well, one of the saddest things about Zeldin is that he has been demonizing Muslims in this country. He supported Trump's Muslim ban, totally unconstitutional ban on people who are, you know, sort of. They're not convicted of anything. They're not under investigation for terrorism. It's a very broad, far-reaching. I mean, the Jewish community arrived in the United States through immigration. Most of the Jewish friends I have families that came in the last 100 years to a country that welcomed them and had, you know, with open arms. And basically, I mean, there was a lot of anti-Semitism here for a long time. People who wanted to keep the immigrants out. In the 1920s, you had the Ku Klux Klan in Southampton had large demonstrations against immigrants. But we are a country that welcomes immigrants because we realize that people come here and they basically live good, productive lives, and we're all better off for having open borders. You know, we need careful rules about it, but this kind of blanket discrimination against any group would be wrong.
All right. I wish I have been in contact with Nancy Gorof's people, and I gave her an open invitation.
She's running against Zeldin for the Democrats. Is that
Democrats.
Yeah.
I'm really upset that Zeldin upsetted Tim Bishop. I worked with Tim Bishop many, many years, and I know he's the one that's responsible for the VA clinic in Riverhead.
Yeah.
I was there at the opening ceremonies. Tim Bishop, he got that.
Well, I knew Otis Pike I know Tim a little bit, but Otis Pike was Zeldin's predecessor a long time ago. He was a congressman for 20 years, and he was an ex-Marine. He was a stand-up guy. He'd been, a very productive congressman. He led the Pike Committee investigations in the 70s that, exposed a lot of misbehavior by government agencies and the Nixon administration. He was the kind of quality congressman that the first district in New York really needs, and deserves. It's not someone who's going to be down the line with any political party, I mean, Zeldin has become, a kind of a muppet for the Trump administration. He might as well be a hand puppet for Donald Trump. He didn't criticize him on any of these COVID matters. He didn't criticize him on the impact of his crazy policies with respect to the economy. He hasn't criticized him on any of the racial or sexual, slanders that this guy puts out on a routine basis. He's never had a word of criticism to Trump.
Tim Bishop was always around, too. They always had access to him. He actually supported my claims against the VA. And he sent them a letter. The first thing they mentioned is his support when they got back to me. Zeldin is the only congressperson that showed up at the opening of our new our embassy in Jerusalem. The only congressman that showed up. Mm-hmm. He took a photo op with Netanyahu and the power couple, Jared and Ivanka. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It says something. I mean, hanging out with Netanyahu and at this time doesn't say anything good about Zeldin.
Well, I think that Netanyahu. You don't have to rely on critics of Netanyahu who are American. I mean, you just talk to there are many Israelis who are in the streets these days protesting the Netanyahu government because of their radicalizing of the political scene in Israel. And Netanyahu is under indictment. He's sort of like Trump in a way, because as soon as Trump leaves office, he's going to experience some legal woes, let's put it that way, because there's a long line of things that Mueller was not able to get to the bottom of, and in the financial world. But I think that there's this interesting pattern of Bibi Netanyahu is trying to stay in office, so he avoids a criminal indictment.
People might have forgotten, but moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem caused an uprising by the Palestinians, and they were basically slaughtered by Israeli snipers. People forgot that already. So,
well, it's hard for Americans to pay attention to stuff outside their own borders, but Jerusalem was always traditionally an international capital. It's been occupied by people of every faith. The Christians threw everyone out there. At one point, had a bloodbath. Back in the early part of the civilization. But there's I think the period that we're in right now is not one where we should be emphasizing eternal wars among these various peoples. There are good people in every faith, in every community, and you need to have people in dialogue about their many differences. They can't just be looking for enemies all the time. There are people who profit from having enemies. There are, huge military industrial complex, the gun manufacturers that support the NRA. I mean, they've got, I talked to landscapers out here who said, I'm voting for Trump because they're going to take my guns. And I said, Harry, I have a NRA license. I'm a member of the NRA.
One of my friends.
I have guns. I'm not worried about anybody taking my guns.
People. Listen,
it's
I'm on Facebook, and there are a lot of people that support Trump and taking. Some of them are saying that they're going to take our guns. And I just like goofing around. I got back to them. I said, first of all, nobody has a gun. Do you understand? A gun is an artillery piece.
Right. Yeah.
You have small arms. Get that straight.
Right.
You don't have guns.
Right. Yeah.
Oh boy.
No, but they're whipping up this kind of really kind of disturbing pre-election
Well, as far as guns go,
atmosphere.
I found out that gun stores don't keep records on how many how many weapons people buy.
Right.
In other words, you could buy as many weapons as you want. There's no record of it, and they don't keep a record of their inventory. Gun stores don't do that. Gun stores.
Right.
They don't do that. So that's crazy. So that's why every once in a while we come across someone that has an arsenal.
Sure. And this has been a record year for gun sales.
Yeah.
Weapon
So
sales.
Why do
Why
you need more than a few weapons? I mean,
Well, why do you even need a semi-automatic weapon?
You
know?
don't.
Most people who would in a gunfight wouldn't know what to do with it. So they probably end up hurting themselves. No, I think that there's a lot of paranoia on the part of the sort of gun owners in this country. But part of that's the Democrats' fault because they haven't basically. I mean, Sanders, I think, had a good position on this. He's a member of the NRA. He says, "I go hunting." He's in Vermont. He has long rifles.
Yeah, we're coming to an end. All right, you got the message, I think.
Good, Joe. Good to be with you.
Line, 'cause friends are friends for all time. Where have my old friends gone? Where are they now? Used to be a walk away.